to thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of India. And now I'd like to give the floor to His Excellency Ramtane Lamamra, the Minister of State and Minister for Foreign Affairs and Internal Cooperation of Algeria.
الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على نبيه الكريم السيد الرئيس السيدات والسادة.
In the name of God, the Merciful, the Compassionate, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Algeria, I'd like to convey my warm congratulations to Mr. Liketoft Mogens for his appointment to the presidency of the 70th session of the General Assembly. I would also like to convey to the president of the previous session, Mr. Kutesa, my most heartfelt gratitude and acknowledgement for the many specific achievements made during his presidency, which we shall endeavor to build upon. This session coincides with the commemoration of the United Nations 70th anniversary. It takes place in a time where the international community is facing many challenges as well as opportunities, which are the fruit of 7 decades of sweeping transformation and collective work, with their part of success and failure. Success, or rather peace and stability, have been restored in many regions of the world, once ravaged by destructive wars, where people have broken free from colonialism in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and the world has seen a qualitative leap forward as well as significant development. This situation is in striking contrast with the ongoing colonization and foreign occupation in some regions, as well as the worsening of poverty and hunger, which remain today the largest challenges for the United Nations, alongside threats of terrorism, organized crime, drug trafficking, and trafficking in human beings. In this context, I would be remiss were I not to reference the media images of the massive flow of refugees to Europe due to humanitarian catastrophes from war and crises. They undoubtedly evidence a collective failure in dealing with conflict and ensuing consequences in many regions, in particular in the Middle East. The outcome declaration of the Development Summit for post-2015, which was held some days ago, has confirmed this observation of failure. But at the same time, it reinstates the universal commitment to tackling challenges before humanity on the economic, social, security, and environmental fronts, and in particular, the need to pool efforts so as to push back against poverty, to adopt new approaches to jumpstart development and improve living conditions for human beings, who should be the focus here, while also ensuring that there's a conservation of natural resources and the environment is protected. From this podium and during this watershed moment, Algeria would like to reiterate the primacy of the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter. We'd also like to reiterate our determination to continue work so as to ensure the victory of values which bring us together and which make the United Nations a mirror for the concerns of the people across the world, their ambitions, their hopes. May I also once again underscore the need to continue reforming the United Nations, adapting its mechanisms and updating tools. This will allow our organization to carry out its mission more efficiently. On the one hand, this is a matter of reaffirming the role of the General Assembly as an architect and mouthpiece for international cooperation for development and the implementation of its resolutions and guidelines. On the other hand, there's also a need to reform the Security Council due to emerging threats and challenges which loom large on peace and security internationally. This principal body no longer reflects the composition of the international community, in particular the African continent. President, Algeria participates in this historic session at a time where we have achieved ahead of time the majority of Millennium Development Goals adopted during the summit of the year 2000, and thus has been recognized by the United Nations due to the program of the President of the Republic, His Excellency Mr. Abdelaziz Bouteflika. We have carried out a far-reaching development policy so as to relaunch economic growth and provide for social needs for all citizens. At the same time, we continue to shore up the rule of law, independence of the judiciary, freedom of expression, as well as equal opportunity for men and women. Due to our central location in the Maghreb and the Sahel, and guided by the principles of our foreign policy, our countries continue to work for peace, security, and agreement with our immediate neighbors, and has provided political and economic support to said neighbors so as to strengthen integration in the Maghreb and in Africa, convinced that this is an investment in the future for all and will forge peace and stability regionally and internationally. This is reflected in the approach of the international mediation team in Mali, headed by Algeria, which led to the conclusion of a global agreement for peace and national reconciliation. We would encourage all signatories of this agreement, and more broadly speaking, all political and social forces in Mali. We call upon the international community, in particular donor countries, to endorse this process and to support it politically and financially. And this in an ongoing manner. Mr. President, Algeria has been alongside the brotherly Libyan people since the outbreak of the crisis in this neighboring country. We've spared no effort in assisting the country in reinstating peace and stability, as well as the country's unity. We reiterate our support to the United Nations efforts in Libya for an inclusive and comprehensive solution which brings on board all stakeholders in Libya for the immediate creation of a government of national accord. Here, we'd like to stress the efforts of the African Union in conflict resolution and peacekeeping on the African continent, which, to its credit, has made several achievements. Indeed, the continent accounts for more than 45% of peacekeeping staff across the globe. I'd like to recall that the last African summit in Johannesburg saw the taking of important decisions expressing the desire of people and countries of the continent to work for African solutions to African problems. Mr. President, in Western Sahara, and after 25 years of a ceasefire between the two parties to the conflict, the Kingdom of Morocco and the Polisario, and the adoption of the UNAU peace plan, the Sahrawi people continue to be subject to occupation and hardships. Back and forth, as well as attempts to duck responsibilities, have continued and have stopped a solution to the conflict being found. This conflict now threatens the credibility of the United Nations or undermines it. Algeria firmly supports the right of the Saharan people to define its future in all freedom. We appreciate the efforts of the Secretary General and his personal envoy, Christopher Ross. These efforts are ongoing. We call upon the organization to set a final date for the holding of a referendum pursuant to relevant resolutions of the General Assembly and the Security Council. This was explicitly requested by the Summit of the African Union. which was held in June 2015. We shall spare no effort to help parties to the conflict and the United Nations to find a swift implementation of this solution, which the people of Western Sahara would so like to see, as well as would other peoples of the Maghreb. Based on this same belief in the necessity to peacefully settle differences, we are carefully following the changes in the situation in Syria and Yemen, as well as the suffering of these two brotherly peoples. We call upon stakeholders to resolutely commit to seeking a peaceful solution to the crises impacting their countries. There is no solution to this, other solution to this. Sir, we are pleased to note the growing awareness about the need to combat international terrorism and deal with its root causes. This is why we call for comprehensive approaches to combat transborder organized crime, including trafficking in human beings and in narcotics. We call for a cutting off of supplies to terrorist groups, in particular, with the prohibition of the payment of ransom. In this context, Algeria organized recently an international conference on de-radicalization. The recommendations here emphasize the imperative need to promote the values of tolerance and moderation. Mr. President, Algeria has paid a high price to regain its sovereignty and join the family of nations. We thus duly appreciate the heroic combat of the Palestinian people to regain its national rights. We share the Palestinian people's hopes at a time where the Palestinian flag flies at the United Nations headquarters for the first time. This is a symbolic victory. It is one which comes after the international recognition of the State of Palestine. It is a support to a fair and definitive solution to the matter of Palestine, guaranteeing the creation of a sovereign state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Mr. President, understanding the importance of the issue of climate change and its fallout on the economic, social, and environmental fronts, and even political and security ones, we express the hope that the results of COP21 in Paris in the near future will find solutions commensurate with the environmental challenges. These challenges now jeopardize entire regions and countries, and as well as life on Earth. Sir, I would also like to note that evidently, in spite of achievements we have collectively made within the United Nations and beyond, the instruments and procedures established by the Founding Fathers for 7 decades have become outdated and are no longer reflective of the aspirations of peoples, the world population now exceeding 7 billion. In other words, the new challenges generated by globalization and the upheavals and transformations affecting international relations for decades force us towards bold reform, one which can bestow credibility and necessary transparency on the international system of cooperation. The marking of anniversaries of institutions, just like people's birthdays, are appropriate occasions for introspection and new projects. And thus, we hearken back to the historic results of the 29th session of our August Assembly in 1974 under the presidency of Mr. Abdelaziz Bouteflika on South Africa, Palestine, and the new international economic order. We do so as to express the hope that the current session will draw inspiration from this historic time in our organization, so as to rise to current challenges by a qualitative, collective, and courageous leap forward to promote a humankind which is at peace with itself, free from fear, and free from want. Thank you very much. May God's peace be upon you.
I thank the Minister of State and Foreign Minister and Minister of